I remember when I was first starting my consultancy in 2016, and one of the first bit of advices I got when I went out for some drinks with a Salesforce AE was like, you need to niche down now. And they had just started those conversations, I think, back in 2016. They were starting to verticalize the AE teams and stuff like that. And after, going out to the market and trying to sell into some businesses, it's very clear that if you have industry experience, you just bring so much more value to the project and to the client.
From Altvia, this is Preferred Return, your opportunity to learn from the brightest minds in the private capital market. Ready to own your technology edge? Let's get you that preferred return. At Altvia, we built our platform on Salesforce because it lets us focus entirely on the private capital markets, streamlining fundraising, investor relations, and data management without worrying about infrastructure, scalability, or security. But what's our answer for your business? Whether you're a Salesforce fan or not, help awaits in this replay episode of Preferred Return. We're talking with a man so versed in Salesforce that he adopted it as a nickname, Salesforce Ben, aka Ben McCarthy. Don't let his moniker fool you. Ben brings a wealth of insight into why an industry-specific CRM is a game changer for your business. And that's not all. This episode examines the ethos that drives Salesforce Ben's success, analyzes the power of the Salesforce ISV and OEM ecosystem, and makes a little room to discuss how AI is shaking everything up.
Ben McCarthy, you're otherwise known as Salesforce Ben, and we're going to talk a lot about that. But also, I have to tell you, we announced to our team on Monday that we're going to be having you on the podcast, and many of them are regular consumers of Salesforce Ben. And I think that makes you sort of the most famous, perhaps, of the guests we've had on Preferred Return. So thanks again for joining us. We're just thrilled to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. It's been a crazy ride, and Salesforce Ben's actually turning 10 this month, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about the Salesforce Ben 10-year party in London. That's awesome. So you're based in London, yeah?
Yes, we've actually got an office now in Shoreditch, which is kind of like the hipster area of London, or it used to be. It's a bit more commercial now. But we've got an office here for a few months with 23 people across the UK and Europe, most of them based in or around London now. I'm not originally from London. I'm from Portsmouth, which is a lot less glamorous down south. But lived in London for the past 8 years.
Well, tell us a little bit about the origin of Salesforce Ben. It's amazing, 23 people. Tell us the sort of origin story, how it's grown and what it is today.
Yeah, sure. A little bit of a weird business, kind of. We're a media business nowadays, just focusing on the Salesforce ecosystem. But it started life back in 2014 when I was working as a Salesforce admin. So I'd been in the ecosystem for about 2 years at that point. So I joined in 2012. I'm like kind of a bit of a tinkerer, like to think I'm a little bit creative. I've always been a bit technical, but I was never a coder. But I wanted to kind of run a website, buy a domain name, that kind of thing. And I thought, I'd just start writing about Salesforce. So it was kind of a funny time in 2014 because it was before Trailhead. Trailhead was released later that year. There wasn't that many kind of content creators. There was a few bloggers around. I definitely wasn't the first blogger. There were a few Salesforce MVPs. A guy called David Liu that you might know, a very, very popular developer, content creator. I just started doing it and started being very consistent. I was working as an admin, and Salesforce documentation wasn't great back then. So I had a lot of stuff I had to find out myself. And then I thought, I'll write all of it down so someone else can kind of access it as well. So I did that. I was an admin for a while. I then moved to Conga, who was the big ISV document generation. Started learning about new stuff, different stuff there. So it gave me a lot to write about. From there, I moved to a consultancy. Started out as a business analyst, but I got made into the managing director kind of because the managing director left, and it was an office of 2 people. So it wasn't much of a promotion. So then I had a lot to write about in terms of consulting. So it's kind of, as my career kind of evolved, I had a lot to write about, and I had a lot of quite a diverse experience from leveling up my own career, focusing on different parts of the Salesforce ecosystem. I was lucky enough to kind of be in companies where it was very good to network. There's a lot of people who worked in Conga that now work for all kinds of different ISVs. So I've kind of learned from them over the years as well. So really it just started out as a blog, and it's now evolved over the years, and we see ourselves much more as a media company serving the Salesforce community to keep them abreast of everything going on.
I want to unpack a lot there as we go here, but curious kind of, upfront early on, what was it like immediate people were taking to this? I know there's all sorts of things about building a business and content like this, and it takes a minute. But I guess ultimately, the point I want to kind of unpack is Trailhead. You mentioned that's come a long way. I think that's been really helpful. But certainly pre-Trailhead, when you got started, and even now today, still just a lot of stuff, a lot of things that the Salesforce platform is capable of, a lot of power, a lot of folks that aren't traditional kind of engineers with computer science backgrounds. And so that where that meets is, a lot of people kind of looking for sort of best practices and, tutorials, I suppose, if you will, on how to do certain things. So, that goes back to my question. I mean, was it sort of immediate? It seems like the demand was there. I mean, how long did it take to kind of really get seeing a ton of traffic?
It was fairly quick, actually. I think I was kind of right place, right time, a little bit lucky. I think when I started out, Salesforce were doing about 3 billion in revenue. And then now they're doing about 33. So, the ecosystem really exploded over that time. So it did get traction quite quickly, actually. I think because I was consistent, I was by no means an SEO expert, but I was paying attention to SEO, trying to rank for keywords, that kind of thing, just trying to be a bit smart about it. So I was just trying to be smart about it, write stuff people were actually interested in. I was trying to be a bit BuzzFeedy about it as well. Like, I don't know if you ever read BuzzFeed, but it was like listicles, I remember writing this one that was like 6 things that make you a kick-ass admin or something like that. It's just a cheesy clickbaity title, but some of the content was pretty good. So trying to do unique things like that. So it did get traction quite quickly. And I remember, so I started it in April 2014. I remember in May 2015 was London World Tour, and I was on the booth with Conga, so I was doing booth work. And people were coming up to me then and kind of recognizing me, which was a little bit nerve-wracking, but very cool at the same time, saying, oh, your site's helped me so much. So it did gather steam quite quickly. And it was definitely down to being a little bit lucky, right place, right time, but also being smart with creating the right type of content, but also being unique about it as well. I'd always recommend any content creator nowadays, what is your USP? In a sea of content creators, how are you going to stand out from another one? And that's why I see so many people now creating AI generated content.
To think 23 people, are employed now, literally, because of this gap or this opportunity, in creating content. I'm curious, you started to get recognized at events and stuff. Salesforce acknowledge you? Is there any sort of, relationship there?
Yeah. So I'm a Salesforce MVP. So I got that it must have been 2015. I got that. So just about a year after I started, which I was ecstatic about. So I've been linked up with Salesforce kind of, officially for a while. Because we're classed as media now, we work with the Salesforce press team. So we get forwarded press releases, which are going to be released, so we get the news ahead of time, just so we can prepare content, write content, which is nice. We have good relationships with Salesforce product managers who will often speak to them and say, what features are they working on? What's new and exciting? What content can we work on together?
I got to tell you, I was sort of one of those folks that probably found you pretty organically, how to do this, how to do that. It's really cool to see that you've built a real business out of it, and you've got the sort of formal relationships with Salesforce, talking to the product managers and things like that, because it would have been easy just to sort of, be a place where there were some tutorials, but those are 2 very different things. So hats off to you. When was the first time you heard the name Salesforce? I was thinking about this morning, and I think I've pinpointed mine. I want to know if you kind of recall that.
I do, actually. So it's quite funny. I graduated from college in information systems, which is perfect for Salesforce. It's basically half computer science, half business, mostly business, less coding. So it's perfect to go into Salesforce. And I did get a job becoming a IT consultant. And it was starting in the September of 2012. And I was just telling people I was going to be an IT consultant, but I didn't know what I was actually going to be doing. But I had a few months before I started this job. So I actually got a job with Yelp, who you probably know very well, but people in the UK would probably know TripAdvisor more, but Yelp's a bit big in the US. And I was actually using Salesforce for that, which was quite funny. And then I quit, and then I got a job at this IT consultancy where I found out on the first day I was going to be working with this tool called Salesforce. And then it kind of all clicked together. And I already kind of knew what it could be used for. So it slotted in quite well when I joined that role. Honestly, it just kind of fit like a glove, the software, with my skills. I didn't really know what a real job out in the real world meant, or what being an IT consultant meant. But when I found out I could kind of build systems without coding and everything, I knew databases, fields made sense to me, relationships made sense to me, objects made sense to me. So I did learn it quite quickly, which was quite nice.
To hear a name like that, I mean, I was thinking, I can't remember now, it was either 2005, 2006. I went to work, as some of the listeners will know, out of school at a venture capital fund of funds. And I was sort of a junior guy on the investment team coming in the fall. And there had been a summer intern who had worked to take what was a newly implemented Salesforce instance by a third-party consultant and start kind of entering all of this data we had at the time. And the data was primarily like details on some of the venture capital funds that we were invested in, and then the information about the underlying holdings of those funds. So, what was the company's name? Where was it headquartered? What sort of sector is it in? How much is the fund invested? Things like that. It's sort of ironic, I suppose, because we're going to go down this little thread here about, kind of the power of Salesforce, but, some of the things about, UX, UI is one we'll talk about. My first recollection is a visual one of watching this intern sit at a computer, what was to me clearly a website, and click through all these screens. And that was, I guess Salesforce called it the Aloha. And so it was like very square, lots of, drop shadows, just hideous gradients, things like that. And at the time, it was perfectly fine. I recall being like, wow, that's a website. And so that was ironically like the first visual, the first recollection I have of being introduced to Salesforce. And of course, spent 5 years going on to invest in software as a service companies. And that, that whole theme was mainstream. And of course, actually, in many cases, used Salesforce as a proxy for how we would value certain companies and things like that. But in any case, I suppose it was right then where I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. And again, I emphasized that it was a website, right? Because it wasn't 2005, 2006. It was not super mainstream to use a browser as software. And then the other one was like, I had to watch him and try to figure out what he was doing because he was leaving. He was a summer intern. He was done. And somebody had to, figure out what he was doing there. He was entering a lot of data. Of course, then the sort of all of the clicks and stuff like that, I had no idea I would go on to have such big feelings about, the Salesforce UX, UI and clicks. But in that moment, it was one where it actually made it difficult to sort of, keep track of exactly what he was doing. So it was a little bit overwhelming. But of course, we fast forward, the story is written for us, to your point, just since 2012, 11 times over that Salesforce has grown revenue. And so I am curious to get your take, just kind of perhaps, your parents, friends, your grandparents have asked you this sort of thing before, what do you do? And you tell them, Salesforce Ben. And then they ask the question, well, what is Salesforce? Like if they asked you that today, I'm curious kind of like what your view of Salesforce.com is today. How would you describe it?
I think it really is kind of, the hub for most businesses now. It's many things to many different people, right? Like if you're a Tableau professional or something, Salesforce is just this random company that's come and acquired your precious Tableau. But I think the way that Salesforce, their kind of acquisition strategy and how they've grown over the years is just really, really smart, almost kind of ahead of their time in a way, because some things like, they started multi-cloud in, I don't know when Service Cloud was born, but Marketing Cloud they purchased in 2013, I think. So that was when multi-cloud properly started, get your sales with us, get your service, get your marketing. That was 10 years ago, and people are still kind of trying to adopt multi-cloud, move other systems on Salesforce so everything's on one platform. I know some people are seeing kind of consolidation now. People have, after the kind of SaaS boom over the last few years, people are using, like, there's some crazy stat Salesforce came out with, like, some enterprise businesses using like 3,000 systems, crazy number of systems. And now Salesforce have all these products, some of which they've bought, some of which they've created organically. One, for example, is like high velocity sales. I don't know if you know that one, but they compete with people like Outreach and SalesLoft, but Salesforce have it on their own platform. A lot of people consolidating software at the moment. They want to get rid of stuff. And I think Salesforce should hopefully do quite well from that, just because people want to simplify things. They want to integrate less with other systems, have everything on the same platform, even though, Salesforce isn't necessarily all on one platform, but it does integrate quite easily together. So they've done very well. And AI, we'll see what happens with that. As much as people like to kind of try and bring doom and gloom to people, like, if you don't learn AI now, you're going to be out of a job next month. I think we are very, very early days. But I think what Salesforce have positioned, it's kind of like Flow or Lightning App Builder for AI. It's a declarative system where you can set up prompts, you can connect to different models. And, we're yet to see too many real life examples of that, but I know there are a bunch out there. I think they've positioned themselves very well. And I said in one of my blog posts recently, Salesforce have slowed down revenue growth quite significantly across most products. Sales and Service Cloud in particular, data's still growing quite fast. Data Cloud's growing very fast, but it might give them a big second wind because they do seem to have a market leading AI.
There was so much said about AI, and people, felt the need to react and declare stuff. And there's going to be a lot of nonsense in that, right? And there's going to be people who strategically are sort of, motivated to and rewarded by just blabbing something out there about AI, but not have it make any sense. And then there are going to be people that are sort of not as quick on the trigger with a reaction, but are a little bit more thoughtful. And when they have something to say, they'll have something that's meaningful. I mean, I think if you're Salesforce, you straddled that line. You had to react and sort of leave the perception with the world that you're sort of on the leading edge of that. But I also think that they've, been thoughtful on the stuff that they've done and they've taken their time with. And to your point, really impressive. They were in a great position to lead there. And I think that they've executed pretty well, even if, they weren't the first ones to have something in front of other people. I think it's, at the end of the day, a little bit more meaningful, at least to me, to see what's the substance of what people are saying about AI and what are they doing with it versus just having a reaction of like, oh, well, you can use a chat GPT bot like on our public facing website, like, cool, nobody cares.
I've been a little bit of a kind of AI pessimist kind of over the past year or so, just because like the hype was just crazy. And of course, ChatGPT was super cool. I was using it the other day to kind of, I don't know if you've tried out the new kind of voice and speak thing. So you can speak to it and then it replies in a very scarily, really human voice, replies back to you. And I was like brainstorming business ideas and saying, hey, what's the disadvantages of this current platform out there? And, would this business idea work to compete with it? It's still very generic, but it's just the way people are overhyping it. And, these things are going to take time. Enterprises aren't going to implement these things overnight. It's going to be a lot of testing, trial and error, experimenting to see what actually works. But then at the same time, a lot of surveys that I've seen are saying customers are basically going to throw money at this stuff because they don't want to, lag behind their competitors.
I think what is so powerful about Salesforce is the fact that you don't have to be a computer science person. You don't even really have to know to code, and yet you can build meaningful business applications and get them to market quickly. And so, I guess I'm a little torn about this, right? Because what has led to Salesforce's success. I mean, at the end of the day, had they been constrained by, an ecosystem of implementers and integrators where that wasn't the case, then of course they would not have gotten into the accounts that they did, and that certainly as quickly as they did. At the same time, I think that there are people who have controversial and conflicted views about Salesforce.com in terms of their own personal experience of being a user. And that is to say that if you've used Salesforce.com, you have an opinion on this matter, even if you don't know it. So, we'll help you unpack it here on Preferred Return. In some cases, people absolutely adore Salesforce for virtually everything, right? Its ability to be deployed quickly, its flexibility, its scale, security, reliability, all those sorts of things. And then they're sort of indifferent perhaps about, the user experience and, whether or not they enjoy the way the application is laid out and the ways that they interact with it. What's interesting, I think, about, the universe of Salesforce users is that many people who have really big feelings about that specific part on the UX front still feel the way those that other group does in terms of like adore it for its, scale and, ability to integrate and its flexibility and all those sorts of things. And now over 20 years or something, I think that the sort of timeline is now long enough that people are, making decisions to stick with Salesforce, not to, to go with something else, because their feelings are so strong about this matter. And so that there's a lot there, and we'll kind of, take it out one by one. There are a lot of folks, there have been since the origin of Salesforce, and the ecosystem has only grown in, compounded fashion. I think Salesforce Ben is evidence of that, of people out there with varying degrees of experience of implementing Salesforce, not necessarily like technically formally trained backgrounds and experience, but, definitely cooking with gas and able to make clicks and relying upon Salesforce Ben to be able to do some pretty sophisticated stuff that kind of straddles that line of don't know a thing about code versus, take it to the next level and do some coding. You've been doing this for a long time. I mean, what would you say about that? There's a bunch of people out there that have made this company in large part what it is because of their ability to deploy it. I joke sometimes software engineers were civil engineers. Like, man, be really dicey, right? Bridges, you'd think maybe twice about going over them each time. And so when we're talking about, folks that aren't even as classically trained as, a lot of software engineers. So, I think that's a part of Salesforce. I think you have to embrace that. It's served it really well. And in some cases, it maybe done a little damage, but certainly you've seen that. In many ways, it's sort of like there are these little Salesforce implementer zombies. And Salesforce Ben is doing the world a favor, a service to help get these zombies pointed in the right direction.
It's a really interesting topic. And, there is a stereotype out there that people don't like using Salesforce. Salespeople around the world unite about not wanting to use Salesforce. I guess there's probably a few things at play. I think firstly, Salesforce is so powerful and you can do anything with it. It does mean you could over customize it, over complicate it. You can create processes that aren't needed. I used to run a Salesforce consultancy and we grew it to 25 people. We were fairly big, had a lot of customers, a lot of SMB customers. And, projects didn't go well all the time. A lot of them did, but it was so dependent on a perfect process, perfect requirements gathering process, perfectly understanding their goals and what their real pain points were, what their needs were, passing that all over to the implementers to do it properly and building in best practice. And, obviously there's 1,000,001 ways to do one thing. So depending on which way the consultant wants to do it, it can get a bit complicated. And then you've got training. Training is a huge part of it. If people aren't on board, you haven't got executive buy-in, you can get some sales managers who are, resistant to using it. And if they're resistant to using it, then the salespeople are going to be resistant to using it. And then you've got ongoing maintenance as well, right? Like we used to work with a lot of customers who had it implemented 5 years ago, didn't get an admin, didn't have any kind of managed services from a consultancy. It's just left there stagnated. Some of the crazy reports and dashboards people build with no experience just look terrible. And, people think it is Salesforce, the platform. It's not a easy tool to work with. Everything needs to kind of run perfectly and you need to have constant maintenance and someone, you need like a sales ops person, rev ops person, kind of analyzing processes, making sure users are happy, making sure those, things are being implemented. And ultimately, Salesforce is there to make you more money, make customers happier, make your users more productive. If it's not doing that, then it really needs to be analyzed. Projects need to be spun up to work out what's actually going on. AI and data quality are coming into play. AI isn't going to be any good if your data's rubbish. And data quality has always been a big issue on Salesforce.
The bulk of them are not, specific to Salesforce. I mean, this is the reality of like business applications generally, right? Especially when you're talking about applications that are as core and as mission critical to businesses, especially large ones, as CRM is. And so, in many ways, that's just the reality of committing and investing in business applications. Salesforce, still has that sort of very unique and differentiated position of a whole ecosystem, time to market, flexibility, all those sorts of things, I think in many ways it sort of gets this bad rap, as if to imply that there's this world out there where you can commit and make investment in a meaningful, mission critical business application, and it'll just be apple pie and roses. That's the sort of flip side of this dynamic, is that because so many people have used Salesforce, because it's so prolific, a lot of people have, controversial opinions about the sort of user experience. Whereas many of us have never actually interacted as a user with like NetSuite, but it's been around, I think even longer, right? So it's a position that Salesforce is probably proud to sort of be in, because it's actually a position that demonstrates their strength. And yet they're also very committed to working through that. And like say, my first interaction with it was a couple of major UX changes back. And so they've definitely, done wonders to do that stuff. But also, part of the challenge here, and where I want to go next, is just the inherent flexibility that Salesforce offers of not being able to design, very purposeful and thoughtful user experiences and user interfaces for every single persona in every single, segment of every single market out there. And so that's where there's a lot of, emphasis on the ecosystem to go with that. And so, on that point, I think that one of the things that Altvia would act as a witness to is that for whatever reason, not because we chose, but for whatever reason, the traditional Salesforce, especially the Sales Cloud model and the workflows, just don't line up all that well with how like private asset managers raise capital for their funds and then ultimately deploy it. And again, that's just kind of one of those things. And I've been fascinated over the years to be working in like the nuance that distinguishes the two in terms of what we've built at Altvia, which is a repeatable model that has all of this. You don't have to rely upon communicating requirements perfectly to somebody who doesn't have a lot of context for, the industry and how the industry works. That is this thing that has emerged very clearly over the years, especially as the result of people who have committed and invested in Salesforce, maybe haven't found a ton of success. Maybe users, get frustrated with what it's like to use the application. And in many cases, kind of commit back to the Salesforce ecosystem and say, maybe there's a specific partner that understands this a little better. And therefore the sort of implementation and configuration of the application will be different. In our case, we're a, OEM ISV provider that has pre-built, the sort of model to the tune of, nearly 100 objects and all sorts of field and code and things like that, because we come from the industry. But what would you say about that? I mean, it's like when you're kind of new to a Salesforce consultancy, it's like, you learn Salesforce Cloud and you learn, object models and things like that. What you don't know that you don't know at that point is what experience will bring you. But it's sort of like, not everything truly is as simple kind of as an opportunity. And I think sometimes the sort of temptation is for, hey, let's go buy Sales Cloud and then hire somebody. And it's like, oh, let's start with opportunities. What's your experience with that? I mean, it's pretty nuanced in certain industries, maybe not all of them, but certainly in this one.
I would probably go as far as to say it probably is nuanced in every single industry. I remember when I was first starting my consultancy in 2016, and one of the first bit of advices I got when I went out for some drinks with a Salesforce AE was like, you need to niche down now. And they had just started those conversations, I think, back in 2016. They were starting to verticalize the AE teams and stuff like that. And after, going out to the market and trying to sell into some businesses, it's very clear that if you have industry experience, you just bring so much more value to the project and to the client. We used to work in private equity and VCs, and it's very different to, selling widgets or something like that. I remember when I was in a meeting with a private equity company, I was showing them a sales path, where you can add in like tips in opportunity stages and stuff like that. And I was like, oh yeah, you can add in tips for your salespeople, things like that, and just ways of working and, what's important to different businesses. I think, if you put a great consultant with financial service experience and a great consultant from some other industry and put them both on a financial services project, the one from the consultant who's never worked on it is going to be a lot worse. It really is, because they haven't made mistakes in other projects, seen what works in other projects. I think that's just a fact. And I think it's even more emphasized by the way that Salesforce have acquired velocity and they've got all their different, clouds.
I mean, these ecosystems take time to evolve. I was talking with my niece over Easter the other day, and she's telling me she's learning about ecosystems and fascinated by the complexity of how they evolve. And so this one too, in the sense that you got to get all those folks out there with skills that don't, kind of line up with the traditional computer science, software engineering, get them, just going and trained. And Salesforce Ben comes along and is enabling these people to do amazing things for customers. And then there's this evolution of like specialization, right? And it takes firms, companies sort of maybe having worked with a consultant and realizing what didn't work, where there wasn't experience and expertise in kind of deploying that, in order to create opportunities for people with the specialization. Certainly that's, a big part of the story of Alvia too, but it's actually pretty fascinating. It certainly cannot say that there would have been a better, path for Salesforce. I mean, it was working out really quite well for them. Just get it out there, get it into people's hands. People will learn. The evolution of the ecosystem will create specialization and experience and stuff like that, that then the same folks will, double down on. That will, evolve on its own. It's a pretty fascinating thing. And I think Salesforce Ben is a testament to that, of how many people out there did not have the experience, could not find the resources elsewhere to be able to do these sorts of things that help perpetuate and grow the ecosystem. Is that a fair take to have about your story and your business? I mean, it, like you said, right place, right time, and really well executed, but that's kind of the reality of the ecosystem. It's a fascinating story. Is it fair?
I definitely think so. I think to your point about niches, it's something we're writing a lot about now. The job market is something we've written about a lot, and it's very clear that those with niches are really standing out and not really struggling at the moment because the Salesforce job market is a bit saturated. We have grown alongside the Salesforce ecosystem. Every time Salesforce has acquired a different company, it's given us more to write about.
Just from your viewpoint and your experience with being sort of attached to Salesforce over the years, like what gets you most excited these days? A handful of them. I mean, is it the stuff that they're doing with AI? Is it, I think one thing we hear about quite a bit versus non-Salesforce competitors in our market is like Salesforce's integration with Outlook and the whole ecosystem of opportunities there. I saw an interview recently with our friends at Affinity, who build an outstanding Salesforce integrated plugin for Outlook. In fact, we actually partner on that. We think it's great, sort of a testament to that. But what are these sort of things, given your history and evolution, what do you stop and be like, wow, this is really cool or really, really powerful, really differentiated, still a, sort of hallmark of what Salesforce is, features, whatever it may be?
I need to preface this by saying that I'm not involved in the technical side of Salesforce much anymore, but obviously I pay attention to everything that's going on. But I think top five have to be Flow for obvious reasons. That Salesforce have made it so ridiculously powerful now. You can do so much with it, and it's enabling admins like never before. The problem is it's got a high barrier to entry in terms of learning. It's definitely not easy, but I think when you get to a point where you can learn it, you're almost as powerful as a developer. Developers are still going to be needed for Apex and Lightning Web Components, but it's got to be AI stuff. I think it's going to be a slow burner. My third was going to be Data Cloud. Data Cloud is very exciting. CDPs are something that I've only just looked into, but I think it's clear they are the future. We are already looking to implement CDPs inside of Salesforce Ben to better understand our audience. What they're interested in, what web pages are they going on. It's not just about what your name is, what your email address is anymore. It's how are you interacting with brands, so we can better target you with information that you're actually interested in. But Data Cloud is running at 400 million in recurring revenue at the moment, and it was only, I think it was Crux originally, which was acquired about 8 years ago, and it's had a few different names like CDP, Genie, and now it's been renamed to Data Cloud. It's growing at like 100% year on year or something. So massive. And, will we see that from AI, the, Einstein? I doubt we'll see growth that fast, but, hopefully it will be. That would be amazing. And AI and Data Cloud go hand in hand because the more data you've got about your customers, the better you can personalize the generative outputs or the summarization. something to add specifically in AI, I would say, is you've got like Copilot, which is the chatbot. You've got Prompt Builder, which is building the templated prompts to do the same things for the same users, craft a sales email, something like that. And then you've got Model Builder, which allows you to connect different models, so different LLMs, to different prompts. So it means that if you've got a specific prompt, which needs a very specific set of data, instead of connecting it to OpenAI GPT 3.0 or 4.0, which is very generic, a dump of the entire internet, you can go to a financial services LLM, which is specifically built for the private equity industry to do X, Y, Z. And you can connect that to that prompt, which is going to carry out something very specific. So those are a few things. Actually, one more just to add on. Salesforce have recently released Marketing Cloud Growth, which is a product built on the core Salesforce platform. So Pardot, now called Marketing Cloud Account Engagement, is off-platform. Marketing Cloud itself, ExactTarget that was acquired 10 years ago, is off-platform. So Marketing Cloud Growth is built on-platform, and it utilizes flows and features like that. So, we write a post going, is this a HubSpot killer? Because people love HubSpot because it is really user-friendly. It's easy to connect to other systems. But, if there's a kind of HubSpot on the Salesforce platform, Marketing Cloud Growth is completely new.
Super cool. It is really fascinating to hear your story, having the viewpoint that you've had and building a business. Again, I mean, I'm just sort of fascinated by the fact that 23 people have jobs, and you're having your 10-year celebration in London next week. That's going to be a good time. They not only have jobs, they probably have a lot of fulfillment working for you and doing this. And to think all of the things that went into making that and Salesforce's role in that, it's pretty incredible. And yet we're starting to talk still about all of the things that are ahead of it as a company and the opportunities, like you mentioned. The other thing I was going to say, just real quick to kind of wrap us up here, is we hear this sort of UI, UX thing, obviously, and I have the views on it and the feelings that I do. It's clear that people feel this way, not just me. And, the ecosystem has evolved to the point where the ability to sort of go specifically into solving that problem are also there. And they're in part provided by Salesforce at the platform level, and in part provided by, third parties and the ecosystem of partners that are in and around Salesforce to, again, ultimately with all of these things, allow folks to be able to get in there, solve specific problems like, well, let's clean up this UX UI thing. And that's a bit of a plug. Look out for some announcements from Altvia here shortly on some really exciting stuff we've done there on UX UI. But just a fascinating story, man. I'm really grateful that you took a minute to kind of walk us through this. I really enjoyed it. And, when you were talking about flows, I'll tell you, Salesforce Ben I too haven't done a ton of super technical stuff there, but flows, like you said, pretty intimidating for a while. And the thing that made it less so and got me into it was Salesforce Ben. So a bunch of things in parallel and some interconnectedness here. Really cool to hear your story, man. Congratulations on everything related to Salesforce Ben.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. Pleasure to be here. Really good chat.
Thanks for listening to Preferred Return. If you found this episode thought-provoking, consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about today's topic or for additional takeaways to own your technology edge, visit altvia.com. That's ALTVIA.com. We're back next month with another episode, so stick around and let's make sure you get that preferred return.